Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Finalizer Super Transformation. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Konami, Finalizer released to arcades in 1985, though only in Japan. For a Konami shoot 'em up, this one's pretty obscure, as it only received one other port to the Xbox Game Room up until this August 2024 Arcade Archive release. So, that said, I really appreciate it being an Arcade Archive as it gives us a chance to explore this unique Konami shoot 'em up. So the main mechanic that drives this game is a transformation mechanic where you go from a fighter all the way to a giant robot. And the title is archaic and clunky for an arcade title. Think something more along the lines of Xevious than, say, a title that also released in 1985 from Konami, Gradius. So I wish that they'd made sequels to this so we could see some iteration and improvement on it. With all that said, I can't really recommend it for anybody but Konami fans and hardcore arcade fans, as there's just too many issues with it, with just some clunkiness and details that it's just not really worth it in my mind to others that would be potentially interested in this title. With all that said, we find ourselves at the title screen. So you can play this game as a 1 or 2 player title, however it's 2 player alternating, so we'll just be showing the game off as a single player title today. Starting the game, we have this sequence where we're approaching Earth, so apparently we're somebody that's helping Earth defeat this rogue AI, and as you can see here, one of the things that's really interesting about this title is where we are in relation to the planet itself. We're not down on the surface, but we're actually somewhere above in orbit around the planet itself, which is really neat. So you see the titles for Cuba and Florida there, so we have some somewhat geographically correct details to our background, which is pretty neat. So that aside, the game is a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up with your fairly normal controls. However, we do have some interesting mechanics as far as transformations and the weapons that are associated with that. So initially you start out as a fighter with just a single shot. And we do have 2 shot buttons. But if we collect the leg parts from the capsules that are launched from the ground, then we can turn into a giant robot and collect another part which looks like a head, and we become an even bigger giant robot, so a larger robot. The large robot is equipped with a shield, which can defend against enemy shots and actual physical enemies if it's on the correct side, being the front or the right side if the shield is not being actively used. And you use the shield with your second button. So the one button fires on your left side, the one button uses the shield, or if you happen to have another weapon equipped as the giant robot, then you'll fire that weapon instead. And that's one of the things that's really interesting about the title, is once you become a giant robot, especially the large form, you can have a weapon in both your left and right, or as the smaller robot, at least you're still controlling your shield, which is really neat. However, it doesn't protect you from enemies approaching from behind. The game does use a checkpoint system. So if you lose lives, you'll continue in roughly the same position you did, but just in a checkpoint system rather than respawning instantly. So that's at least, it's kind of nice that that's kind of a forgiving system. The exception is when you approach a boss. A boss, if you're stuck in a death loop, you'll just continue to respawn against that boss and be stuck fighting that particular enemy until you've defeated them. Or, as other Konami shoot 'em ups, this one also has a timeout system for the boss, so the boss could potentially time out for you. So as far as let's see if we can get back to being the giant robot again so I can actually show this off. There's a potential of 5 different weapons that you can equip on your giant robot form, either left or right. And when those weapons fly up from the ground, you're going to go and see a left or right icon on your actual fighter itself, so you know what side that it will equip on if you want that power-up. But with that said, so this is left fire, let's give this one a shot, as I think the left fireworks is actually like one of the best guns in the game. Although there's also a rocket punch, which is just really fun as a giant robot. So one of the problems this game has as far as power-ups is concerned is if you shoot the power-up once you've got it out of the capsule, then it starts to change into other power-ups. And some are useful, some aren't. So it cycles through. The first one is B, which is not useful at all. It's just bonus points. Then you've got one that stops time, like you saw there. If you go one step further than that, it gives you a crash, which is a power-up that allows you to deal damage to enemies with just your ship itself. And you can also accumulate massive points in that as you build a combo that goes all the way up to 8,000 points, which is insane for an arcade title at that point. So now we find ourselves fighting the first boss. It kind of looks like a Gradius Big Core. So I would say that maybe this one inspired that, but once again, you have to factor in that these two titles released in the same year, 1985. This game will, now that we're through our first boss, the gameplay loops through and you'll encounter another big core-like enemy, and then there'll be one more other type of boss you see, and then things start to loop. And indeed, the background itself will loop. We'll be back to seeing Cuba and Florida eventually as well. So at this point, we're probably flying over the Arctic. Now we're probably back approaching... Where will we be on the other side of the planet? Maybe going like sailing over the Pacific at this point. I do like that it's got that geography twist on it, that we're flying around the planet at that point. So, with all of that said, this isn't a title that, as I was saying earlier, it's not a title that I can recommend for those that aren't hardcore arcade fans or fans of Konami shoot 'em ups. And why is that? Well, there are just a couple elements that, especially after the first boss, just get really frustrating. So the power-ups, if you're not careful with your power-ups and you fire too many shots, then you're going to change that power-up to something you don't want. And like, that's a perfect example there. I fired too many shots and changed the weapon from a weapon to just bonus points. And that happens too frequently, especially when you're new to the game and just dealing with all the enemies themselves. So that's the first major minus flavor that I have for the game. It would have been great if they could have done something more like, say, 1942, where you could at least shoot the power-ups a couple times before they changed to a different power-up. That would have improved the game for me so much. Then the game itself is quite difficult, and the bosses themselves, past your first encounter with them, can be very hard to deal with. You're looking to either defeat them or time out at that point, and it's not a very satisfying way to just be trying to time out an enemy. And then there's one other problem that I have with the game, although this one might just be me, I'm not sure, or the fact that I'm reviewing this title little ways after its launch itself. But whenever I've tried to upload a score, so this is more the emulation itself, I'm crashing the software, so I haven't actually been able to go and post a score, which is a little disappointing. On the plus flavors, though, I really, really love the transformation idea. The idea here that we're transforming from a fighter into a robot and then an even bigger robot, being able to use that shield to block enemies or potentially like shots, different weapons, the equipment there. So many of the ideas here are awesome. I just love that idea. Then we've got the awesome, well, the background itself is relatively plain, but just the idea that we're moving over Earth in kind of a low Earth orbit and that things look about right for that is definitely impressive for the era especially. But then you also have all the enemy sprites. So we're not the only ones that you might have noticed, we're not the only ones that are transforming as well. The enemies are also doing the same thing, and that's really neat to see in my mind. The way that the enemies are approaching, the way that they scale, just their look. So we have, as far as like graphics are concerned, something that definitely feels a product of its time for sure. So the boss was timing out there, but unfortunately it hadn't left us. Oh, I guess I do get to continue. So it's like just the mid 80s. The Japanese were definitely big into the whole like transforming giant robots, and like this title kind of feels like it was a part of that. But it would have been great to see just a little bit more from the Konami team that made this, maybe just with some more improvement. But I just love the art. I love the way that the enemies look, the way that they transform, the whole scaling of the sprites as they come from the surface. All that's great. In addition to that, you've got some great arcade classic sound effects. This one just feels like a title that would have been in the arcades in that era. And the gameplay itself is spot on if you're looking for something that's kind of like Xevious, but really it just kind of feels just a little bit dated for when it came out and the company that released it. So, there you have it. Finalizer served up for your enjoyment. Definitely a title that some might enjoy, but it's not one for everybody. Alright, that just about brings it to us to the end of this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, we want to thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.